This conference will now be recorded.
I will call the February 10th, 2021 work session to order at 6:15 p.m. Are there any additions or removal of agenda items tonight?
Not from me.
If not, would anyone like to make a motion to accept the agenda tonight?
I'll make a motion that we accept the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Lauren. Would you call the roll, please, Stephanie?
Mayor Hobart,
Aye.
Councilor Williams.
Did you say Williams?
Yes.
It's not coming through clear.
Councilor Williams,
Aye.
Councilor Allen,
Aye.
Councilor Potter,
Aye.
Councilor Webb,
Webb.
Aye.
motion carried.
My internet's kicking in and out.
Okay, new business discussion on reserve funds.
Anything until this is over.
So we're going to talk about reserve funds tonight, and I'll turn that over to staff before we have any discussion to kind of give us a little preamble, please.
Okay, so I didn't obviously write a staff report on this. Thought it would be easier just to explain it. Starting in 2014, we began creating reserve funds for different departments within the city. Right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I sent all those to you in the packet. And so the purpose of a reserve fund is to establish money from year to year for a specific purpose. And that could be to purchase new equipment. It could be to repair or replace facilities, anything like that. It's the correct way to save money for the future, according to Oregon budget law. So in the past, we never had these. It was just kind of the money just rolled around in the operating funds where it's harder to set it aside. So what this does is allows us every year to come up with a certain amount, or however we want to adjust. What we're going to decide tonight is how we're going to move forward with this. But every year we can put money aside in those funds, and then it can't accidentally get used for something else. So we can create a budget for each of those funds. It's not a matter of having to move that money back, let's say, to the water fund if we needed to use it. We just create a budget within that facility reserve or operating reserve or whatever. So that's basically to just look at all those as a savings account for each of those departments. So the plan tonight is to come up with what you guys want to see for caps and maybe annual contributions, things like that. I don't know which one you want to get started with, or if we just want to try to, I don't know that it would work to have a blanket policy or amount for all of them, because like the parks, for instance, a lot of times doesn't have a lot of extra money to set aside. So that fund has always been kind of, if there is excess, then we put it in the reserve. This past year, I don't think we put any money in. This year, I was able to transfer some. So it just kind of depends on each year. But like the water and sewer, those reserves are built into our rate so that we can guarantee every year we will get X amount set aside. So I don't know which one you guys want to tackle first.
Let's take them in order.
Well, I mean, we don't need to labor over each one. It's just kind of like we can look at the water and sewer as kind of one policy, let's say, and then the other ones are a little bit different. So I don't know, Dale seems to have kind of some thoughts on the matter. Maybe it'd be best to just let him start and see what we think.
Well, I think you're correct. There's kind of a major distinction between the water and the sewer and the other operating or other reserve funds. Water and sewer, like you said, we are actually building a rate to bring that money in. Those other funds, we're not setting a rate. I mean, we're getting camping fees and some of it's property taxes coming in. Um, so I think the major concern has been around the water and sewer reserves, what our targets are. Um, and maybe you might need to explain the difference between an operating reserve and a facility reserve for all the counselors. Um, there's quite a difference between them, when we would use that money, where are we comfortable, at what level of the operating budget would we be comfortable in the operating reserve, um, things like that. You want to speak to some of those issues first, Angie?
Yeah. So, the difference is facility reserve is for facilities. So it would be the headworks, major infrastructure, the water plant, any of the reservoirs if we needed to do work like that, major things, major parts of the system. The operating reserve would be if there was something were to happen and we lost a bunch of ratepayers, or there was some catastrophe where people just weren't being able to pay the bills, or people moved out of town or whatever, and we have a shortfall, then that's where that operating reserve comes in. And with that, the best practice is 6 months. So whatever 6 months of our current budget is what we should have set aside. So that's and I feel like that's probably a good goal to keep. I don't know if a year, up to a year would be good too, but I think beyond that would be unnecessary. The facility reserves, however, though, can be a lot higher. That money could also be used for if we were ever to need to do a major remodel or replacement where we had to get funding, then that reserve fund could be our down payment or our own reserve or something like that, where we're going to need capital. We're going to need something in order to get that financing. So right now, I have a little worksheet that I created just to kind of do the math so that you guys, as you come up with different figures, I can tell you what that looks like. And I just threw in $1 million into each of those facility reserves as a goal. I don't know if that's way more or way less than what you guys will in the end think we need to have, but that right there is a good chunk of change. So,
Counselor Allen.
Yeah, Angie, maybe you can speak for all of our benefit on these reserves come out of people's payments, and I'm just wondering if we pick a number, we should also pick a timeline to hit that number, because you could say we want $1 million reserve, but we're going to do it all in 1 year, and that's not fair to the ratepayer. I'm thinking like a 5-year to get to the number we want and figure out the percentage. I don't know what Mr. Webb would think about that, but.
Well, and that's what I've got this worksheet for. I basically created a little simple calculator. So I've got what's our goal, and then how many years do we want to take to do that, and what does that annual payment look like? So right now I have 30 years to reach $1 million. It's going to be $22,000 a year out of the budget, to transfer from the operating fund. So if you wanted to make it, obviously, if you wanted to go 15 years, then you double that amount. So these are just numbers I pulled out of a hat. It doesn't have any, real basis. I just
So what do we have now in water facility reserve, just for example?
Right now we have $340,000.
And we need, you said $1 million run per year. So if we cut that in half, it's $500,000.
Yeah, if we did, let's see.
So, JR, I think you're confusing operating and facility, because the facility reserve really doesn't have a best practices because it's really skin in the game for some major new project or funding. So the half of a year is only connected to operating reserves, and that's connected to half of the year of your operating budget.
Because I'm not seeing a line on this sheet that says operating reserves.
I gave
Yes,
you a sheet for each individual fund. Should be the next page, JR.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, the facilities is the one that I'm talking about with the $1 million. So if you wanted to do half of that, is that what you were saying? You, instead of $1 million, you would go $500,000?
Yeah, and then if we divide that by 5 or 6 years, then what's the number kind of, looking at? I think that's the kind of thing we need to know before we start.
If you wanted the cap to be 5 million and you take out what we've already collected, we would need to pull out $32,000 for the next 5 years. And you would
Is
reach
that-
500,000.
Is that even doable at the rate we're charging right now?
No, because I plugged in the numbers that we used this year, and it was 22,000 is what we had built into the rate this year.
So we need another 10, 20 cents a gallon or something to come up with that number.
Yeah, and like this year, and I think the last year it happened the same way. We had our budgeted amount that we were going to transfer, but at the end of the year we had more cash on hand than we planned. So that's another way to build these up. Is any excess that we end up with, we can just have the policy saying that excess money goes to those reserves.
Have they brought it back yet?
Okay,
Joseph,
thank you.
So I heard JR say something, and Dale and I have talked about this. We really, as staff, want council to figure out whatever the policy is going to be and not have it moved one way or the other by what you guys feel about the rate, because the rate is so complex. If we get more users, then the slice of how many pieces of pie the debt is sliced into becomes smaller. So don't let the rate necessarily, unless you're going to like triple what we've been saving, then maybe we talk about the rate. But don't let the rate motivate you one way or the other, because it's so complex. It's how many users we have, how many meter multipliers. So we really wanted to get your guys' take on what is important for you in a cap and a facility reserve, and some sort of policy or directive around, are we aiming for the 6 months operating reserves, and once we hit that, then we put in a more smaller amount each year till we hit a year, and then we quit collecting, kind of those policy things, because those are really what staff needs to know to kind of set stuff up. The rate's going to fluctuate up and down a little bit, and that's kind of the goal, and the rate review committee will produce the rate out of the budget that you guys pass after budget committee. Sorry if that was a lot.
No, I think we all understand that, Joseph, but we kind of need to understand the effect of the ratepayer, like you said, if it's going to jump way up because we say we want a certain amount in 5 years,
Right. I think the only tricky part is until we actually plug in those numbers with the customers, we don't really know what the exact effect will be. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. And which one was it that takes a council action to spend out of it? Is that the facility reserve?
No.
Operations?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
Oh, okay.
If there's no budget for it during the budget process, if we don't create a budget for that fund at that time, then it will have to come before council to spend any money out of those.
There's really never a point you guys wouldn't know what was coming out of here, either because you did it in the budget process as a project, or we had to bring it back to you.
Dale.
So I think Angie's kind of got on the right track on the facility reserve. This is like buying a house for the city. I mean, this is a long. I mean, this is going to be a never-ending commitment for us. Um, you know, the one question around is where's our upper limit? Um, I know Bruce and I batted that around in the past. You know, you could really say there is no upper limit, but there's probably a reality of how much money of the ratepayers we want to be holding on to. Nice phone. And, you know, I don't know. You know, one time we said 5 million. I've kind of been kicking around maybe, you know, if we reach 2 million, which even by Angie's numbers there, you know, we're not even going to reach that in 30 years at the current rate. But then again, there's the other part of this equation. The operating reserves, I think Angie had figured we're about 5 years out from meeting the operating reserves at at our current rate that we're putting in, which is again another subject over the map. Hopefully my internet's still on here. Getting the old red bar. I'd kind of like to see us kind of really fix that amount. Um, you know, just like making a payment every year. That'll give staff, they're going to know what the number is every year. The surplus money, we have surplus money usually if things go good in our budgets. It's just kind of built in there. We got excess cash carry forward. Um, Once we get to the say 6 months on the operating reserve, we are in a comfort zone there. Now, whether we want to go for a full year after that point, take another 10 years to get there, or maybe it's 15 years to get there, whatever, you know, term. But, you know, once we get past 6 months, we're more comfortable. We can cut back on it a little bit to get to our goal, long-term goal. The decision we need to make is, do we then shift some of that money over to facilities reserves? You know, that could make sense. Always in the ballpark is, uh, you know, if we have something occur in our budget, which we have had a couple of times, when we kind of have a reset on workers, we get lower wages. I think we had something happen with insurance here. That gets a reset in the budget. Of course, it can go the other way too. But what do we do with these excess funds? I think on operating reserves, when we're below our 6 month target, we need to be putting those monies into these accounts. Once we reach there, then it might, maybe some of it shifts to the facility reserves. And then we can also have a discussion if this is a reoccurring excess every year, we could adjust some rates with that. Because part of the equation, what Angie does is this cash carry forward coming into the new budgets. And we got phones ringing here now. You know, we usually what we do is we take the excess and put it into these reserves. But we can decide to cut rates a little too. So I think I lost my train of thought when the dang phone went off there. But, so I think we probably need to take these ones that's kind of operating reserve first and you know, I mean, agree on, and Angie will have to help us out. Um, what did we put in there last year, Angie, for, it's been all over the map.
29 and water facility and 25 went to sewer facility.
29, yeah.
So
But that's
30K extra a year is all we're getting out of the water fund? Or is that how much you put in?
That's what we budgeted to move.
So how much extra did we bring in last year on water than we spent total?
Oh, well, shit, I don't know. Let me look.
Because I know we didn't change the rate.
Last year,
So it's like 27.
So we're pretty thin on extra money coming in then.
So this year, my cash carry forward was about 25,000 more than what we had forecasted it was going to be.
Well, I'm not talking forecast, I'm talking total expense and total revenue.
That's what the cash carry forward is.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear for everybody to hear that.
Yep.
So if you needed 300 grand, it would take us 10 years to get there, so.
Well,
If we
and that's
pick a
just
number of 300 grand we want there in 5 years, we're gonna have to adjust something.
right, but we're also, that's in excess of the budget. So we already budgeted for that 30,000 to move out. And then what we need to do is, because you guys haven't, well, the past council didn't set it either. And so now that's what we're hoping to do here too, is what's gonna happen to that extra money. So if I think at the end of the year, my cash carry forward is gonna be 300,000 and it comes in at 340,000, what do we do with that $40,000? Do you want that to go into the reserve fund on top of what we've already budgeted, or like Dale was saying, that's where it also can go into the calculator then to come off on the rate side. But then you've got this up and down thing with the rate.
Or we pull some of it off for a year or so and build up a facilities fund.
Right,
Without
that's what I'm
tipping
saying.
the rate.
That's what we need to decide. What do you do with that extra money? Are you throwing it into facilities, or you? Yeah, I mean, and that's what I would do, just to get to that cap sooner.
Go ahead, Dale.
Okay, Angie. So um, how many, what dollar amount and how many, and we already said about 5 years to get to the 6 months on the operating reserve. What dollar amounts for each fund?
So for the operating, that would be, for 5 years, it would be 28,700 for water and 27,500 for sewer for 5 years.
And that gets you to 6 months?
Yeah. How
Yeah.
much was it for sewer? 27.5.
So personally, I'm good with sticking with the 6 months and get there in 5 years. If we can if it comes in faster, then that's fine, but I think personally, we need to shoot for a 60-month to get to a 6-month goal at a minimum. I think it's a smart thing to do, to plan for something catastrophic. You never know when we flood again or have other issues, forest fire, you never know. So that's my thoughts on it.
Josette.
So the question would be, if that's what we put in the budget and we get to budget time and there's extra money, is it the council's will that that extra money goes towards boosting that operating reserve and getting to that 6 months quicker, split evenly between operating reserve and facilities reserve, or put back into the calculator to change the rate? That's really but we're going to propose what you guys, if you say it's the 5-year mark, we're going to propose that that's what is in the budget to build. But then what do we do with that extra fund? Say there's miscellaneous income from bulk water sales or something like that comes in. What are you guys as a group looking to have us aim towards doing with the extra?
Dale.
Okay, so that's a great point, Josette. And so Angie and I had a little discussion there today. Where do we need the money the most? And which funds are we going to be expected to be dipping into the most? The operating reserves, those are a big what if situation. Like you say, flood, fire, something, and we've had some floods, so we know that could happen. Although we've got a lot of mitigation that's went on. We shouldn't expect the same ramifications if we have a flood again, because all those houses have been raised. So we shouldn't have that big dropout. Financial probably would be the biggest one that'd get us. We really, the expectation is the facility reserves are the ones that really are going to need. We could spend money tomorrow out of these accounts. There's no question. We've got projects that we could do. I mean, water, we could be upgrading the east side of town, the water lines. There's probably a need there. A reservoir is always on our back burner. So it really looks to me any extra money should be funneled to that facility reserve. And for the time being, anyhow, that's just my perspective. Let the rest of you ruminate on that.
Grant,
If we were to put in another reservoir, would it be east or west side of town?
The next reservoir in the master water plan is scheduled for at the top of Noakes. The city owns the old dump property up there by Odom's, in between Odom's and Terry's Gym.
Okay, that's quite a ways from the dump. What, about a mile and a half, 2 miles?
No, from the old dump that's in between Odom's and Terry's Gym, there's property there that the city owns. That's
Yeah.
where the placement of the next reservoir would be.
But the old dump was west of there. You're not talking about right on the old dump site.
Yeah, I'm talking about the top of the old dump site.
Okay.
Grant
So there-
wouldn't know where that is.
Oh, sorry. It's like a wooded area on the left-hand side of the road, right before Terry's Gym.
okay, so there's no potential problem with contamination there.
No, we're working to get that released from DEQ. We've done testing and stuff. It was a dump when there weren't nearly as many household chemicals out there, Grant.
Right. Yeah. Paint and all that. Well,
Yeah, everything wasn't so toxic.
right.
I'd like to say a little something. I came on, of course, 2 years ago, and I was new at this, and you know, I don't know about the two new counselors, but right the first year I learned about the city going with the reserve funding in 2014, and they became a lot more fiscally responsible. And I kind of agree with Dale. It's like buying a house. If you can get in the same thought process as if you're dealing with your own finances, and to be fiscally responsible, I think you'd want enough in your savings account that if you were out of a job for a year, you'd want enough in your reserve or your savings account to pay for your mortgage, pay for all your bills, pay your electric bill, and so I kind of look at it that way too, like Dale does, and so the last 6 years or so, we've built up reserves in our different departments, and so now we're just discussing how we want to allocate it, how much we want to put in there. And I had a question for Josette. Dale kind of answered a little bit, and actually Josette answered a little bit, but once we agree on a cap for the reserves, then you kind of look at, I was going to ask Josette, well, then you think about rate reduction or rate increases or whatever. I really liked Dale's two ideas with what to do with the excess funds, and I'm totally in agreement with putting it back in facility operations also. And then also looking at rates, whether you want to increase them or not. But that's all I have to say on that. So I do have one more question. So Angie and Josette, are you kind of looking for a ceiling, an amount where we want to put into our reserve and then
Yeah, we need a cap for the facilities reserves.
for the facilities?
Yeah, the operating, I mean, we've batted around between 6 months and a year, so we know we're not going to go beyond a year probably for that, but for the facilities, that could get up there to 1 or 2 or 5 million. It's like, what do you guys want to see? Obviously it's going to take a long time, but we need to have a goal to work towards.
When was the last time we raised the sewer and water rates?
We haven't in the last 4 years. We actually reduced them
Oh,
by
okay.
$20. So
Yeah.
our goal is to kind of keep it on a straight plane and go up or down, just to not have it be so kind of volatile for the customer. They never remember when you lower it. They will remember when it goes up 10 cents.
Yeah.
It just happens that way. So kind of a stable rate if we can, and then once we're done needing to collect money for reserves, then look at how many payers you have and is there a return or not.
Grant.
Are we looking to establish a cap for all of the reserves, or are we talking just about water right now?
So the cap we're asking for is specifically related to the facilities reserves, because the operational ones already have their own cap in meaning that you would not keep more than a year's of operating reserves, because it'd just be kind of not required and kind of money hoarding.
So we're not talking about a particular individual fund right now. We're talking about overall for the whole city, for everything?
No, we're talking about water facility and sewer facility.
Okay,
those
water
are the ones we would like a cap discussion from council on.
Okay, so are we looking for a different cap for each fund or a different?
I would recommend doing the same.
Grant, they break down sewer and water in two separate funds,
Mhm.
even though we get a kind of a sewer and water bill at the same time.
Right.
So your sewer and water is broken down into separate for budgeting. So, and all
You
they're
gotta
talking
get your
about
crash
is
course tomorrow on that.
how much money we want to save here before we all of a sudden kick back and say we're going to lower the rate 10 cents. So right now we're getting a little bit extra coming in. If we hold that line, we can save up some money, hopefully in 5 years or so, and meet our goal for operations. And then they're talking about once we meet that goal, either it all goes to facilities and continues, or we do a 80-20 split or 50-50 split or whatever we decide.
Well, I would be in favor of keeping the rate even. And if it looks like we're not increasing at a satisfactory rate, then we would have to raise it. But I think people, once they get used to a regular rate, as long as we're operating and being able to save, why consider lowering it? I mean, that's one way to build it quicker and transfer the money over sooner.
Well, we set this goal at 6 months. They might have to adjust the rate, a little bit to hit that goal. That's what we're saying here. If we set the goal and they do the numbers, they'll come back and say, to meet your guys' number, we're going to adjust the rates a little bit here. Because each year things get more expensive with salaries and PERS and maybe hire another person and you say, oh, all of a sudden we got to raise rates a little bit because we want that certain amount saved each year. So that is one consequence of saying we're going to save 40,000 a year toward this no matter what. They'll have to build that into the budget and adjust it. So
Well,
it's
what
just
percentage over expenses are we bringing in right now? So I mean, I don't have any way of determining how quickly or how big the cap is if we don't know how much over present operating costs we're bringing in.
well, Angie said earlier, you might have missed it. She currently said we're bringing in about an extra 30,000 a year, roughly.
Well, give or take, yeah, it's not annually necessarily, but what we're doing here, Grant, is whatever money we decide on is gonna get built into the budget every year. So we're not depending on extra or
Right.
depending on underspending the budget. You guys what you're gonna do is set the amount or set the cap and set the time frame so that we know what annually we need to build into that budget. And
Okay, so currently we've got 30,000 over roughly.
this year when we started, the water fund had about 30,000 extra to start the year than what I thought we would have. But that's irrelevant because we already have the transfer built into the budget. The transfer money is already in there. It's gonna leave regardless.
Okay, so we don't have a cap now. We want to establish a cap.
Correct.
And we got $30,000 towards whatever we determine the cap will be.
Sure. We have 29,000 budgeted to go into that fund this year.
Okay, and we want to have 500,000 in 5 years or
284 grand. If you look on page 8, right at the bottom, 6 months of operating equals 284,800. That's just for water operations. I don't know if you have the budget in front of you that she provided in the packet.
I do.
Page 8 at the very bottom in bold, it says 6 months is 284,000.
Mine says,
I got a date
mine
at the
says
bottom of my page.
266. 266,950, mine says.
Are you
That's
looking
the
at sewer?
sewer. That's the sewer
Sewer.
operating reserve.
Page,
Okay, water.
they're fairly close to the same, it looks like, for,
Yeah, I got you, Jared.
Well,
So-
I don't know how I'm missing that figure that you're talking about. My pages have a date, but I'm looking at the water, the 2 pages for water.
So the water operating reserve is the title.
Yes.
Okay, so then down below, do you see where it says 6 months of operating equals 284,800?
oh, yeah, my page numbers are all the same. Sorry, Grant.
That's okay.
At the top, it'll say water operating reserve.
Right, I got that.
Then at the bottom, it should say 6 months of operating equals.
Well, I don't know how I'm missing it, but I'm not seeing that.
Right below where it says policy, funds collected in water operating reserve.
I see it now. I was
Okay.
reading, I was up in the meat of the text. I didn't go to the very bottom.
That takes a
Okay.
little bit to get used
Sorry.
to Angie's
Sorry.
spreadsheet. So Angie, basic question for Angie. If we said we want it in 5 years, 284,000, are you gonna have to raise rates?
No.
You won't.
Okay. That makes it pretty easy.
It's actually less than what we budgeted this
Yeah.
year. Not by much, but
And then, of course,
Well, if it
anything
ain't
extra
broke-
we ended up with, it can go in that also.
If it ain't broke, it doesn't seem like we need to fix it.
Well, it's a policy thing. We set the
Right.
policy so people can't and do different things even after we're gone. Hopefully, they continue the policy, right?
Right.
Just a savings
there-
account. So we don't have to run to the bank and get a loan for $100,000.
Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, JR is correct. We're setting a policy, we're putting in a framework. People that come behind us can look at this. Hopefully we put enough verbiage in here for they can understand, okay, here is their goal. This is how they're reaching the goal. It makes mathematical sense of what we're trying to achieve here. So yeah, the operating reserve, we try to get 6 months. Um, I would throw out there, we split the difference between 6 months and a year and go for the top target of 3/4 of a year in operating reserve to cap it off. We will quit collecting at that point on 3/4 of a year.
Josette,
So is there consensus of council to have a timeline goal for obtaining 6 months in both water operating and sewer operating in 5 years?
Aye.
Okay,
Josette, I have a
so
question.
then, yeah.
How do we establish the mechanism that keeps us bringing in that 30,000? How,
Well, so if you guys have consensus, the things you have consensus to tonight, we're gonna put into a policy that you can actually vote on, right? And the policy would kind of be an outline of, this is the timeline, this is the expectation of what you're gonna bring in. And the mechanism is that staff's gonna use that policy to then put in the budget. So if we know we have to collect $144,000 in the next 5 years, that's going to be $28,740 every year. So that's the number we're going to put in the budget and on the rate for money that needs to come in each year. So we're the mechanism, the policy drives us to do what you say, basically.
so is it evaluated every 6 months?
No, it's because we're going to present what your policy drove us to in the budget documents. Then you're going to go through all your budget meetings, right? And see all the different funds and how we've laid out the different things. Vote on it. If you adopt it, then the rate has that amount of money being collected each year from the ratepayers it has to come in. So it gets right there, put in the calculator to develop the rate.
Okay, I'm like Dale. I lost my train of thought. Okay, you gotta have X amount of money. What else might get hurt by establishing a fixed amount that's going to go in there? What other part of the operation would be possibly hurt by that?
Nothing really, Grant, because we started this in 2014, and in the last 3 years, an amount, not specifically the amount you're determining, but an amount has always gone into that rate towards these reserves. So it's already a practice we're doing. We're just trying to solidify some timelines, some cap amounts when we stop collecting money, and then some determination from you guys on, is this the right way you want us to go?
Well,
nothing really gets hurt.
Yeah, I'm new at this. What do you mean when you say stop collecting money?
So if we put a $2 million cap on facilities reserve,
right,
and say we had a big building boom and we have a ton more customers, and in the process of all of that influx of cash, that facility reserve hits its cap, we would quit building that into the rate calculator and charging the customers for it, because we'd just be holding that money.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
Now, Dale, I had a question for Dale. You threw a little, you extended it 3/4 of a year just to build the funds up higher or quicker?
No, what I'm saying is we have our initial low end target of 6 months. At
Right.
6 months, we are now comfortable where we're at. A lot of us have thought, well, 6 months is great, but maybe we need a little more. Maybe we don't need the full year. That's why I'm saying we would go to 3/4 of a year. That would be our top limit target. We would stop collecting those monies at that point. And just to throw out there for you guys, about $1 on the base is $10,000, roughly somewhere in there. So, but we're already collecting this money. And the budget always has some carryover unless we have an event. Uh, it's just built into our budget the way it's constructed. There's nothing nefarious about it. It's just the way, I mean, Angie's got to have some cushion in there. And the way we structure our rates, as long as we're in a good economy and we're growing and building, we will bring in that excess money every year. So that's a reality. When operating reserves get to that 6 months, and then we might say, okay, we want to get that other quarter of it in the next 10 years. That's really going to cut down on that amount we're charging for the operating reserve. Then's probably the time that we look at how much or do we do some rate adjustment or put in a mechanism to smooth rates in a transition over a period of years. There's different ways we can do it. I think staff, and it's understandable. I don't think any of us want to see our rates jumping around from year to year greatly. Although I do think the customers need to understand the nickel and dime adjustments are just a reality of running a business. I'm not afraid of that, but it's them dollar or two jumps that gets people's attention. And that would be for future discussion. I think at that point, if we get 6 months, then I think it's in 5 years out, whoever's running the show, they need to determine at that point. Because if we've been kicking an extra 30 grand over to the facility reserve on top of what we're already putting in there, I mean, that's close to 60 grand a year going into facilities. We're going to be a long, we already got 300,000 in there. We'd be up over 600,000. So in 5 years.
Go ahead, Grant.
Dale, as you just described it, if we surpass our goal at 3/4 of a year, are you talking about adjusting the base rate?
What happens, Grant, is well, if we're basically collecting $29,000, that's
Right,
roughly $2.90.
right,
Roughly, I mean that's not exact, but just give you an idea. So that money, we would then be making a decision what to do with that. Would we give it back to the ratepayers? Would we do like JR said, split it 50-50 or some ratio, give half of it back and the other go to facilities? I mean, I might be inclined to go that route. But that'll be a future discussion down the road. I don't know if it'd be appropriate to set that now, put it in stone for 5 years out. That'll give us time to think about that. But even at 6 months, I think we can taper back on what we're bringing into that account. That's probably when we'd have that discussion.
Okay, thank you. I'm new to this and I want to understand it. Thank you.
Grant, I think I could help you with that. I'd break it down real simple for you. Let's just say it cost them $1 million to run water and sewer, and that's probably fairly close.
Right,
And you got 1,000 customers. That's fairly close to what we have.
right,
100 a month, right? That's
right.
$100,000 a month times 12 is 1.2 million a year. And it
Right.
costs us with labor, everything, say $1 million a year.
Right,
That means that gives us a cushion of 200,000. Out of
Right.
that cushion, we're proposing set aside 60,000 a year for water and sewer to
right,
start building up a reserve.
Right.
Now, if costs increase because of wages and PERS and other thing, maybe in 3 years, and we don't get more customers, maybe we lose some customers, we might have to bump up a little bit to be able to keep that 60,000, 30,000 each fund going into our savings account.
Right.
So that's kind of how I break it down. Just real basic, real simple.
Thank you. That was nice and clear.
Well, and tomorrow, Grant, after we go through, when you and Lorna come in, I think it'll make a lot more sense. I know it would have been nice to do that prior to tonight, but once we go through how the budget works, I think it'll make more sense what we're talking about, because you'll
Thank
actually
you.
see the whole thing tomorrow.
Thank you.
What time are you having your session, Angie, tomorrow?
11 o'clock.
Josette.
Okay, so if I'm hearing this correctly, the consensus of the council is that on the operating reserves, we're aiming for a 6-month initial goal within 5 years and max and stop the collecting at 3/4 of a year. Okay. So do we want to move to facilities? And if you want to put a $1 to $5 million cap on the facilities reserves?
Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw out there $2 million. It's hard to wrap your head around. It's going to be a goal some of us probably will never live to see. I can't envision holding $5 million worth of the revenue tax or the ratepayers' money. It just seems excessive. So anyhow, I'm just going to throw that out there. 2 million. That seems to be that does. I can wrap my head around that. Because think of all the accounts. We're going to have $4 million if we ever get there sitting in reserves between water and sewer. That's a big chunk of change for this town.
And just to be clear, there's no timeline on that.
Yeah.
That's going to build up slowly, slowly, slowly. Because as a ratepayer and you weren't involved in this conversation, and you find out we're paying all this money and they're rat holing $5 million, I want my money back.
So Angie, but do you have figured if we continue to put what we've been putting in how many years it would take just for a ballpark to get there?
About 50
At the current rate
at the current rate.
for 2 million.
Yeah.
But if we add another 30 grand onto it, we're cutting that in half. Huh?
Well, if
Let
we
me,
go down now.
We're doing 29 now, and if we happen to get, just say we get 30 grand surplus every year, I don't know if we'll get that, but
Yeah, you could do it in 35 or 40 years if you could probably do it about 30 to 35 years if we had that the surplus in there too.
Josette.
So I have a question, and maybe it's to Dale. So if our goal is to have 6 months of operating reserves and to absolutely stop collecting at the 3/4 of a year, why would we be putting the extra money into facilities reserves instead of building up and cutting off the pull from operating reserves quicker?
I think we said we
You
would
dump
be.
that same $30,000 extra into operating reserves, then you can get to your comfortable state potentially in less than 5 years, even the 3/4 of a year in less than 5 years, and stop collecting it.
oh, I see what you're saying. Try to get the operating reserve to the comfortable level instead of putting it all to facilities. I guess my logic to that is I'm comfortable of achieving our minimum goal in 5 years. Viewing that we never had any reserves for how many years. And also that probably our need to tap into that account is far less than the facility reserve.
Okay.
And so that's kind of my logic behind that. I'm just comfortable getting there at our present rate. And facilities, we probably, can you tell me in the next 5 years we're not going to pull the trigger on, you know, a significant project in either one of those funds? It's probably there.
Right.
Go ahead, Grant.
Is there a ballpark figure of the cost to establish that new reservoir and hooking that up to present supply?
Well, there's a ballpark figure of like 9 million from 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I don't know what today's fee would be. If we had to estimate it now, it's probably $20 million, Grant.
Okay, so what's the plan to pay for that?
Well, so like a lot of this stuff, the facilities reserve would be our skin in the game to get a USDA grant or a DEQ grant or a clean water grant. There's, for small communities like ours that never will have enough ratepayers to really do what we need to do, there's a lot of programs out there where they'll either give us a loan, plus like the sewer treatment plant, we got a $2 million grant on the $5 million, 5 or 7, Ange, I'm looking at your face, but you're too far away.
It was 500 and then we had 2.5 million grant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So somebody else comes up with the big bucks, but if we don't have entry money, we don't get to play.
Right, and the other thing that facility reserves are beneficial is if you had to get private funding, if it was not a government funding source, they're going to expect you to have that down payment, so to speak.
Right.
So that's the other reason to hold on to enough money if you had to go into some sort of private funding mechanism, that you'd have a way to get them to play ball with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dale.
So that's another part of policy that on these reserves we might want to talk about. And Angie and I talked about it today. Some of these lenders, they require us to have basically a year's worth of payment sitting in a loan reserve. And in the past, when we had these, we had to raise the rates to bring that money immediately in to get that money at the front end of those loans, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Angie said the USDA spreads that over 10 years to collect that money, but even that can, is a significant raise. What I would propose, if we do use facility reserve money to front that money, it's basically a loan into that loan reserve. And because currently those loan reserves, we pay in, and then that last year that we've collected that's sitting there in cash, they use that to close out the loan. We wouldn't want to loan that money over there and just burn that. So we would just probably continue the payments for one more year and use that to close the loan or fill back into the reserve, one way or the other. But basically out of that reserve, I wouldn't expect us to burn that money just for that loan reserve. We'd loan it over, it would pay back at the end. So, but that's probably a policy, don't you think, Rosette? We should probably set. I mean, or I guess you cross
Well,
that
I don't
bridge
know,
when you.
are any of us going to be here when we have the final?
Yeah.
That's my only hiccup about putting something out there that far, is that will it not have been like rolled into something else? You never know. You know what I mean? Maybe they re-amortize the debt and do a whole different thing, and that becomes the new payment. Or it's hard to say, Dale. I'm all
Okay.
for it if it makes you guys more comfortable with it. But the reality is, we may not even be around, any of us, when that transaction flips like that.
I guess my only part on that is if we had that verbiage written in there, if we do that, then that might spur that discussion at that time when that council brings it up. They go, oh, maybe that's a good idea, instead
Yeah.
of forgetting about it and just burning a bunch of cash
No,
and
I
just
have no
taking a
problem if you guys
windfall.
want to put that in there.
So Dale, what you're saying is you had to take 500,000 and front this bank for a first year of payments. And they use that 500,000 for the first year of payments. And then the loan ends and the 500,000 doesn't go back to the facilities fund it was taken from.
In a rough sense, that
But
is
wouldn't that
correct.
reserve stay in there though for the whole life of the loan, or do they let you get rid of that reserve after a certain amount of time, Josette?
No, it has to stay.
Does it?
So typically what it's used for is at the end of the loan, that reserve you're hanging on to makes your final payment. What Dale is saying is, instead of making that final payment and then we knock that repayment fee off the bill, we keep collecting for another year to pay back that reserve, that final payment back to the facilities fund.
And that makes sense, you know.
Mhm.
But I can see where people would want to. Oh, we got the money. Let's just pay it off a year early, you know.
Right.
Josette, would this, whatever we come up with, would that be in the form of a resolution? Yeah.
So we're just kind of getting from you guys kind of what we believe, so we can draft something and bring it to you in a real meeting where you could vote on it.
Right.
Well, if some of our new council members probably don't know, but Dale's pretty in tune with the sewer and water from years and years of hounding our city administrator on the public works committee. So he's pretty good at fine tooth combing those rates, and he has a big knowledge of it, put it that way. So if you think they're trying to sneak something past, they're not going to get it past Councilor Webb. I can tell you that.
Any more discussion or questions? Go ahead, Josette.
So what I'm hearing is that for sewer facility reserve and water facility reserve, there's consensus of council to have a $2 million cap on those in the policy.
Seems reasonable.
Which could take a long time to get to.
Yeah, and the other question I have is there also consensus of council that extra funds that are not in the budget to go into either operating or facility reserves will be earmarked into facility reserves for water and sewer? Is that what you all feel is appropriate? So if there is an extra 30,000, it's going into the facility reserve.
Until we reach the 6 months on operating
No,
reserve.
no. What?
Until we
Say
reach
that
the
again.
6 months of operating reserves. At that point, then we'll be looking at it. I guess you'd be correct. We'd be doing what you're saying. I guess it would be the operating reserve part of it that then we would maybe be making an adjustment to.
So I'm hearing that the extra money goes into facility reserves, and that this policy and any changes are revisited once the operating reserves hit the comfort point.
I would like that.
Yeah, because what if it was 250,000 a year extra coming in, and maybe,
Right.
maybe we didn't want to put 200,000 a year in facilities. We want a rate reduction. So I
Right.
think just saying it automatically goes to facilities. Well, what if we get a lot more customers? And I don't know. Somehow we start really getting over the top, maybe. But I doubt that's going to happen with the size of our city. But I'm just
Well, we'll see it every year in budget too. We'll be showing what we're proposing goes into those. Okay. So, Ange, you had other reserves connected. Do you have any determination or things you want policy made about specific about those?
I don't think it would hurt to have something, especially for like general fund reserves. Not that, I don't know, the only difference with these other reserves is they're not driven by the rate. So they're more of like whatever we have extra goes there. I guess the only thing would be if anybody had an idea or a preference or, you know, whatever of what they would like to see there. You know, for instance, for our building here, it's what, 25 years old. So it's going to be, you know, we haven't had to replace the roof yet. We haven't had any major things happen, but odds are they're coming. Same with the library. So, you know, right now what I have in there is 250,000. I don't even know what, that's not what we currently have. That's what that's just the number I plopped in there for the cap. And that would take 7 years to get to that point, putting $24,000 a year into that fund. So, but there again, with the general fund, you know, we can never really depend on anything, really. It's just year to year, you know, it's gone up and down a lot. So that's where I don't know, we really want to set a cap, or do we want to make the policy more of something, you know, just some sort of guideline to help us, the future us, determine that we still need to, you know, as the budget allows, put X dollars in, or, you know, some kind of a goal, just so that they don't get left sitting there with no movement. The Parks Reserve is, we set that up for maintenance and projects and things like that. And then the cemetery money is kind of its own thing. So that one's kind of a weird one to, I don't know how we set a goal on that, because it's totally dependent on people dying. So.
remind me again, Angie, how much the general fund is typically. 2 million, 3 million? I can't remember.
Oh, our total budget for the general fund. Oh, I can't. There's too many numbers rattling around in my head. Just a little over $1 million.
Okay. But you could set a number, a goal of
What was
5%.
contingency this year?
This year it was 65,000. We put 20,000. We transferred 20,000 out, but that went to give it to parks for our buy-in to the skate park money if we need to give it to them.
So 50K a year would be about roughly 5%. It would take you 20 years to end up with a year's backup. So you're currently saving about 2%, 2.5% if we stuck with your 24K.
Well, wouldn't be an operating reserve. This would be the facilities. So yeah, we're not looking at the operation. It's looking for a number to replace, you know, to do major repairs on the buildings.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. So I don't know what a roof would cost on this thing. So things like that is what the goal was.
What all buildings would that include? You got the library, you got City Hall, the Learning Center.
The Learning Center. Yeah, that's really it. The Rose Avenue building, I think they're going to have their own maintenance fund. And then obviously general fund becomes the borrowing fund if parks need something that they can't afford, then general fund can pay for that. But like
To
we
me, it
say,
would seem like 20,000 a year into the facility reserve over 5 years, you know, is 100 grand. We ought to be able to take care of some stuff, even if it's
Yeah.
several bigger items. So
right.
that's just my thought.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to set that or if it's just kind of leave it up to the budget process every year to come up with that figure.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's at, Angie. It's not what, you know, we can't guarantee, it's not a rate we can set and collect it. But that's the discipline we need to have in that budget process. We need to know we're putting a certain amount into reserves each year in general fund. I mean, that 20K we put forward the skate park was probably our reserve, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's a decision we've got to make, but you know, we all need to keep that in the back of our mind as we can't keep doing that every year either, or we're going to be in trouble.
Right.
Angie, on Parks Maintenance Reserve sheet, the 1645-00 contract services, was that for the play shed roof, 20,000?
I believe so, yes.
So there's a
Well, no,
roof
for
for,
that, I paid for that that's out of the, we paid for that out of the general fund. There's not been any, there's no expenses out of the parks facility. The $20,000 that's in the budget is for the state.
oh, okay.
But yeah, we haven't spent that.
So the play shed roof came out of the general fund then?
Right.
Oh. Well, how do we want to approach this? The general fund and the parks and the cemeteries?
You could set policy telling us what we can use it for. I think that's something that we need to include in that, but I don't know that we can set a cap or an annual goal. We have a goal, but not an annual set amount, just because it is so dependent on the year-to-year happenings.
We could set a goal of 2%.
Yeah, and you could set a goal for anything, and then just have, there's going to have to be something in that, within that policy stating that if that goal can't be met due to budgetary constraints, then it's not going to be, because we can't, like especially for the cemetery where you can't control what's going on up there. If we have no business, we have no business. So, Ben's plan, if it works, we'll have lots of money to set aside, but it's still, it hasn't gotten all dialed in yet. So, but the way the general fund's been going the last few years, if we continue at this rate, we're going to be getting more and more property taxes. It shouldn't be a problem to set money aside every year.
So what was your proposal, Angie? You're the one that does the numbers.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I was mostly just focused on the water and sewer as far as the numbers were going. Right now, what I have in my little thing here for general fund is $250,000. And that would be 7 years of transferring out 24,000. So, I mean, that could be our goal, and then just see if we can get there.
I'm pretty good with that goal. I think that's a good goal.
Well, I think more importantly for these other reserves would be setting the policy, telling us how do we go about spending that money? What can we spend it on? Who gets to decide? If it's not written in the budget, it has to be a council action. It can't just be us, me arbitrarily deciding I, need to do something that is going to cost a lot of money. So that was my biggest part of wanting to do all of this was to get something in writing for us to have the guideline and just to fall back on and say, look, this is the policy, this is how it's going to be. So I think that's the most important thing to me right now. But like I said, these other three funds, putting a cap on it is going to be a little bit more difficult.
Well, Mr. Webb was the one that brought up this general fund reserve rollover, I think, after last year's budget. So am I correct in remembering that, Dale?
Yeah, I don't remember that. The general fund rollover.
I thought that's how all this started.
I guess that eludes me.
Okay, all right, well, it might have come up
I
then
mean,
as part of the whole conversation with water and sewer.
right. I mean, I didn't look at our cash carry forward on it. I can't remember if that's growing or not each year, but
Angie can answer that.
yeah,
We
you
had,
know,
we took,
it's all budgeted out.
that cash carry forward can just be spent wherever way they want. I mean, so there's really
Uh,
no control
She's
on the
got to
cash.
account for. She's got to account for that.
It's
It's
got
in
to
the
be
budget.
budgeted items. That's the only thing we can spend any money on.
Yeah, we came in, it's been going steadily up the last 3 budget cycles. And that's, a lot of it's just because the property taxes are going up every year too, so.
So what happens with that cash carry forward? We have a bad year, it just goes down. I mean, are we talking about transferring a chunk of that into a facility reserve and just leave it there?
Yeah, that's what I've been doing is when I write the budget every year, I figure out where I think we're going to end the year, and then that cash carry forward becomes, the beginning point. And then after I've written our budget, and really for admin, our budget doesn't fluctuate a whole lot year to year. So anything that's left over, that's what I put in that transfer out. So that's how, we already have $83,000 sitting in that reserve fund. And that's not, that's after paying for the play shed roof. So we had over 100 grand in there at the beginning of this budget year already. So it's not, I don't think it's going to be that hard to get that 250,000 in there. We probably will do it sooner than 7 years if we keep having the excess. So.
And we on 1920 looked like we dumped 110 grand in there. So that was kind of a reset there. We had quite a bit of cash carry forward. We'd been accumulating, and then we dumped that excess in.
Right.
So there again, that's kind of the mechanism that happens once we get quite a bit because Angie. Oh boy, my screen went weird. I hate that one. I can't. There, everybody's back on. Man, this is getting bad. It always ruins my train of thought when it does that to me. My screen all went blank for a second.
So we're keeping the 2
Anyhow,
years.
I'm gone.
Oh, you're done? Okay. I was going to try and remind you.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of it, Angie. I mean, you fill certain line items a little extra here and there. Sometimes you use contingency as kind of a balancing point in your budget. She's got to have places. I mean, things aren't set in absolute stone in those budgets, and she's got to have some flex here and there. So contingency is one of them. Sometimes you throw more in contract services or something like that. There's places that you can fill the gaps, but when we don't expense them, those keep accumulating forward as cash carry forward. And eventually there's a time we pull the trigger, just like we did in 1920. We dumped 110,000 into this reserve account. So I'm comfortable with staff getting their budgets pretty well fleshed out and where they want them. And I think it's just going to be a natural flow. They're going to end up with extra money there, and then we're going to be having during the budget discussions, what are we doing with this? So I think, she can only put so much away, and and then we got to deal with it.
But is the goal that you would want to see like a 2% goal of us putting 2% in each of these if it's possible, and then doing the rest of the numbers, or you want to let it all just kind of free fall? Do you want us to intend to put a certain amount or some amount in these facility reserve for the library, city hall?
Go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, I think for the general fund, that would be appropriate to put a kind of a set amount, set that goal, that $250,000, and collect that over the next 10 years or whatever to get there, or where we're doing about, you said we're doing maybe about 24,000 a year, so whatever that works out to.
That's pretty close to 2%, I think, Dale.
Yeah.
That's, I think, how JR came up with it.
I mean, if your income's going up and you still try to stick to 2%, with inflation and stuff, you're still trying to, it's the same amount,
Well,
really, right?
yeah, and
Or
I think that,
if your income goes down, you can adjust it down a little bit, right?
right, and if the income comes in like overwhelming, you're going to see that dumped into contingency and be able to make a decision of, hey, we want to throw more than 2% during the budget process. If we stick to this one number and then throw the extra into contingency, you'll see it there and be able to make that determination as 5 of the members of the budget committee. You need to get a couple more on your side to vote for it. Okay, so I'm hearing
I'm
that
good
for
with
these reserves, that staff's goal should be to put in 2%, if possible. Dale, you're hesitating,
Yep.
Dale.
Well, I mean, general fund, I agree. I don't know if we have much discretion in parks and cemetery and things like that. So,
Right,
I mean,
but but like cemetery
but we
does have
should
a
be striving.
windfall.
Yeah.
And before they spend it all, if the goal is to get 2% into their reserves, then before we buy a play structure and after the new fiscal year or something, we're going to put that reserve aside and buy a more modest play
Okay. Yeah.
structure.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good discussion because we do have a little surplus we're going to be discussing this year. And I might be voting to go a little heavier on that reserve out of there to begin with because we don't have much.
But at least it gives us a place to start, and then if there is extra funds in there, you guys, as the budget committee, could always propose to put more towards the
You can do
reserve.
that. Nope. I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Angie, what time are you having your little session tomorrow on the budget?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock?
And I was going to do it here if that is okay with you guys, because it'll just be too hard on Zoom to explain things.
But we weren't planning on having all council there, just Lorna and Grant.
And then are you still planning on doing the refresh at the beginning of budget?
Yes. I'm going to go over the same thing that I'm going to go over with them at the very first budget meeting.
So Rick, she's going to do it again at the budget meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
We didn't notice it, and if one more of you shows up tomorrow, then it would be a quorum. And
Okay. Yeah. Well, no problem. Yeah. Thank you.
So
Grant?
Go ahead, Grant.
Is there any way that we can calculate possible inflation into our proposal? Is that something that we can build in that's adjustable?
I mean, we could, I guess I could just look back at previous years. I don't really have a surefire way of figuring out what that would be going forward.
I realize it would be very hard to do, but
Yeah, I mean,
it's a real possibility that inflation will happen.
you could always follow the cost of living, which is 2.5%.
Dale,
I just want to point out that, and I think staff's in concurrence here, these reserve funds sit in a state account. They're all mixed together right now at this point. The interest off of those, I think we have agreed is going to, on those, especially on the enterprise funds, the reserves will be going back into those accounts. So those accounts are going to get a little interest every year. So there's probably your inflation factor right there, especially as they start growing bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got them broken out right now. I figured out what the allocation would be for the first half of the year. So I'm just going to make that adjustment, and then going forward in the budget, it will just be built into the budget.
Thank you.
Josette, go ahead.
So the last kind of question that's out there is, does council want to add around some policies of spending in those three other ones, or would you rather have staff present you with some policies or limitations on what we think they should be spent on? Do you want to talk about it now, or do you want us to kind of propose it in this resolution with the other policies and amend it a couple times before you adopt it, I guess is my question.
Go ahead, Grant.
Do you have your own ideas probably, or are you going to consult other cities to see how they do that?
Well, I think we have our own ideas only based on kind of the direction of the budget committees of the past and what the determinations were made, different things got spent out of. So I think they're all going to kind of fall in line. But I just want to make sure if there's some pressing thing any of you think, we don't want to spend time putting it together if it's the opposite of what you guys think.
Go ahead, Dale.
So maybe a couple trains of thought. I think the obvious, since those like parks and cemetery, we should view those as their own entities. It's kind of like the enterprise funds, but they're not enterprise funds. I mean, theoretically, that money could be switched from. I mean, we already do it from general fund over to parks. But I'm a little hesitant to allow, once we build these reserves, to allow them to revert back to, say, general fund or, inter funds both ways, I mean, parks to cemetery or vice versa. I think that's a sideboard we really would want on there. If we build that reserve, it stays within the reserve. Within, parks is parks and cemetery is cemetery.
No inter-fund transfers.
Yeah, definitely not that. Loans. And, the other thing is, we really struggle to build these reserves. And I kind of view those reserves as the basic functioning of these parks that we're holding this money for, the emergency situations, say down at Anderson, a big electrical burnout underground, big cost replacement type of thing that you can't anticipate, or water system or something like that. I think we need to really be careful on not spending out of those reserves for the amenities. sometimes. It's easy when that reserve's sitting there. You go, oh, well, there's a chunk of money. We can spend that. And, you know, that's one reservation.
The only tricky part is that cemetery on its own has such a very small fund that their current reserve has been used as that project-based funding mechanism, right? So the columbarium, new bollards, the flagpole, if those things aren't in their current budget, that's where they would be proposed because it's easier for Angie to track projects out of that than just out of O&M and a slew of receipts that come in for chemicals and for, all the things you need. That's the only tricky part with these other funds is that is how we've been tracking projects happening.
So Josette, maybe an example of what maybe Dale's talking about is the sale of the cemetery house. That money that we have still available, I mean, we're using it to upgrade the cemetery, but that's in its own fund for the cemetery, right?
Right.
Right. I'm good with the no interfund transfers and nobody sharing money because we've had that where we borrowed from sewer rehab and it was a nightmare to put it back over the last whatever years. But what I'm saying is where Dale was saying don't spend it on amenities. Some of the funds, that is how we've tracked the projects of installing those. Not that the columbarium's an amenity, but it's kind of like one. Not a basic bone thing of the cemetery. And so that's why I'm kind of batting it back to Dale because I'm concerned that is how we're tracking some of that.
Well, in the project, anything that we wanted to spend out of those funds has to go through the budget committee anyway. So
Right.
I'm not just going to arbitrarily order a $25,000 play structure and use up all the reserve without either the budget committee or council, if it comes after budget, giving the approval on that. So there's always going to be that safeguard that we're going to get permission from the group before we go forward with anything like that. And that obviously will be into the policy.
And I think that's the proper place is in the budget discussion, but I think there needs to be some sensitivity to those reserves that I don't view the columbarium as a amenity. I mean, that's a functional piece of the infrastructure of that cemetery. It's what's going to be bringing you revenue. Playground structure, I guess it could be argued it's going to bring you revenue because people come with their kids, but in the context of Anderson Park right now, that's probably a moot point. Building new spaces that would bring you new revenue would maybe be appropriate. It's really a fine line to split that out. I agree there, but if somebody were to come in from parks and say we want to dip into reserves because we want to buy a whole truckload of fertilizer to fertilize the grass, we need to have those are operational budgetary issues that you need to have the funds for. And that's my only fear is we get much of a pot of gold set aside there. There's going to be that constant pressure of trying to dip into it. And if we dip into it too hard and then we have an event, guess who they're going to come to get that money? It's going to be the general fund. So
what about reserves for wages?
Or
I think that's kind of the situation we got going on at the cemetery that I'm concerned about for next year. We're not having any income coming in there, so how are we going to pay for wages next year or two?
well, this year we don't have any wages to pay because our guy quit on us. So
Right, but I mean, aren't we thinking about hiring another person here starting?
But it's not gonna use up what we have in the budget right now. I mean,
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but
Right. It's like we're spending because we have this little pot of gold, and we got to look at the end of the rainbow, what's going to happen there if this plan doesn't work out, bringing in the money with the columbarium right away. Eventually, I think it will, but it might not be as fast as what we're hoping for.
right.
But I mean, obviously you're aware of all that, but
Well, and that's something that I'll know for sure what that looks like when I start writing the budget next month, so.
Lorna, I saw you had,
Go
I
ahead.
saw you had your hand up, Lorna, I'm sorry.
Oh, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
I'm just
It's
hanging
going
in
around.
here. Yeah, I think it's a disease or something. I don't know, COVID or something.
Yeah.
So hearing what you guys said, maybe we'll just pitch a few policies around, and then you can amend it or edit it. We'll bring it to you the first time, not expecting that it's perfect, and you guys can have your 2 cents on it if that works.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Okay, we're about ready to wrap it up.
are we going to talk about parks?
I think we kind of were.
I didn't hear any numbers, or maybe I missed that.
Well, I think what we got is that we're going to aim to put 2% in, and when whatever's left will probably end up in contingency or budgeted, proposed as projects in the
Okay.
regular parks fund. And then as part of the budget process, if there's a lot there, you guys may decide as a budget committee to transfer more than the 2% we're going to put in.
Okay, I heard the 2% for the general fund. I didn't know we lumped parks in with that same number.
Well, it seems like a goal we could probably hit initially in all of them, and then see how it works out if there's extra
Sure.
through budget.
It's probably good to have at least a goal, even if it's a small one.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion or questions? Okay, would you like to kind of give it a little summary, Josette, and then we'll close up the work session.
Okay, so I have the resolution will include wording on the operating reserves to have a 6-month initial goal and to get there within 5 years. The max timeline for collecting will be when we hit 3/4 of a year of operating budget. That's when we'll stop collecting with such fervency. The facility reserves will have a cap of $2 million. That will be the long-term goal. Extra funds each fiscal year will go into the facility reserve until the comfort point is set with the operating reserves. Then the policy will be revisited. Because you may decide, now that we're not kicking into operating, we're going to kick even more in, or 50-50 split, or return to the people. And for general fund, parks, and the cemetery fund, reserve funds, for general fund, the goal is going to be that 2% or 24,000 to get to the 250 by 7 years. And for the other two, we're going to aim for 2% if possible towards the reserves. And we're going to pitch some policy recommendations as far as spending goes that you guys are going to bat around when it comes to you in a resolution. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yep. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. It's good to see everyone on here tonight. And thank you, Josette and Angie and Stephanie and staff, and a lot of good discussion. So I think we're heading in a good way. So with that being said, I will close this work session at 7:55 p.m.
And reminder everyone, the meeting is on Tuesday.
Yes, at 7 o'clock.
Correct.
Oh, hey, Stephanie, can you give me a quick update before we go on cemetery if they're going to meet?
Yep, the agenda is in your email. It's also on the city calendar, how to attend it via GoToMeeting. However, I sent out an email to everyone today. If there is a big storm event tomorrow night and we have power outages, there will not be a meeting.
Okay, so I can pull the number call in off the city website.
Yes, so if you go to calendar and double
Yep.
click on the cemetery committee meeting, it'll have the GoToMeeting info there. If you have a problem with it, I will be here. So just call me and I'll send it to whatever email address you need me to send it to.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye guys.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night, all.
Great meeting.
Right.